Discussion keeps the world turning.
This is Roundtable.
You're listening to Roundtable. I'm Fei Fei together with Yushan and Steve Hatherley. Coming up, Europe is in a hot debate right now, and I'm not being metaphorical. Temperatures in cities are hitting 40 degrees Celsius. Schools send kids home, and there are countries and cities banning outdoor work. And now, millions face a question no one thought they'd need to answer. How do you cool a continent never designed to be cooled? And today we're diving into Europe's heat crisis and why staying cool is far more complicated than just plugging in. Our podcast listeners can find us at Roundtable China on Apple Podcast, and please don't forget that we want to hear from you as well. An email is great, but a voice memo is super great. Send those our way with your thoughts on any of the issues we discuss on the show to roundtablepodcast@qq.com. And now,
Europe is feeling the burn. Experts say heat waves like this are often...
The UK has recorded its hottest ever May temperature. The record was broken in London, hitting 34.8.
One of the many lakes just outside of Berlin in the state of Brandenburg, where many people have been fleeing to from the city and the incredible heat that Berlin has faced.
France is sweltering, and this heat wave has now sparked a very hot political debate.
there was some archived reporting from our colleagues from CGTN Europe, and they're discussing really the record-breaking heat waves that are forcing governments, engineers, city planners, and even ordinary people to rethink how Europe should adapt to a hotter future. And at the first glance, I think for many of us, the solution could be very, very obvious. Install more air conditioner. But as we discovered today, it is actually far more complicated than that. So we'll explore with how Europe's climate changed so quickly and why they can't just be simply installing more air conditioner, Steve and Yushan. So it's so hot in Europe these days that people can't endure any longer.
Paris, 40.9 degrees Celsius in June of this year. That was a 2026 record for the city. Madrid, Spain, around 40 degrees. Areas of Switzerland around 38 or higher. In the UK, 37.7 degrees. That was a new national June temperature record, according to the BBC. Germany also marked a new record for 3 days in a row of apparently 41 degrees Celsius. It is really, really dangerous right now in terms of heat. The World Health Organization warned that Europe is now the fastest warming continent and needs to do more to protect its citizen. And at the same time, you mentioned it, Fei Fei, there's a growing debate. It's emerged across the continent. Should they dramatically expand their use of air conditioning, or would that create a new set of environmental and infrastructure challenges? It's really dominating headlines in Europe right now.
Yeah, and I think it could take us a few minutes, especially for us, for those of us in Beijing, for instance. 40 degrees for a resident in Beijing is not like a record-breaking level of heat, isn't it? But apparently for European cities and European countries, they don't normally have this kind of hot weathers in summers in history, really.
Yeah, traditionally in Beijing, when it gets hot, it gets really hot up to 40, 45, but it's not like long-term running, maybe just for a few days or during a certain spike of a period of one day. But nowadays, what's going on in Europe, it's kind of like a different case scenario because, first of all, and there's been an unusual early start to summer because the warning signs appeared earlier than many experts could have expected. So already back in late May, an unusual early heat wave already spread across Western and Central Europe, with temperatures climbing 10 to 15 degrees Celsius above seasonal average. So for many communities, it felt less like at the end of spring, but more like it's already like middle of the July by early May. So AC, I think you mentioned earlier, air conditioner, that used to be brought up quite broadly during one year's Summer Olympic, was that when it
Oh,
was discussed?
yeah, in Paris during the Summer Olympics. This was a hot issue back then, is that the Olympics, I believe they built the dorms for the athletes in a way that was supposed to be environmentally friendly. They were going to they plan to keep the dorms cool with thermal, something using water to keep it cool.
Yeah.
Some of the athletes were very upset about this. It caused a big stir. And it's just kind of an issue in Europe that maybe doesn't exist in other parts of the world. And they attribute this. They did a study from the World Weather Attribution, which is it's a Europe-based collaboration of scientists. They say this is all about climate change. They say that the study found that the heat would have been virtually impossible just 5 decades ago, the temperatures that they're experiencing now. And they also said in that study that it's 200 times more likely today to happen than it would have been 20 years ago.
And 20 years ago, when we're thinking about summers in a European country, we're talking about degrees of about 20, 24, 25, very comfortable.
Yeah, around the year 2000 or so, in the summertime, in June, you might have cities like Paris or Budapest, or, pick a European city that would be, 22 to 24, 25, 21, just somewhere in that range, right? There were certainly hot days that occurred at that time, but the long stretches above 40 degrees were almost unheard of. And the problem isn't simply that Europe is experiencing hotter weather. It's that millions of homes and apartment buildings and schools and hospitals, they were designed for weather that doesn't exist anymore. They were designed for a summer where you have 21 to 24 degrees, something like that. And that infrastructure worked at that time, but not anymore, and that's one of the major conditions that, or problems that we're dealing with today.
And more than buildings, Steve, I think it also sort of changed people's perceptions when it comes to how do you spend your time in a summer. And I think you spoke to one of your friends?
Yeah, one of my close friends, one of my former radio co-workers, actually. His name's Peter Bint, and he's from London. He's living in Seoul now. But I asked him just about the general idea that people have in England about air conditioners and what role they play in people's lives.
Growing up, you would never see air conditioners in people's homes, ever. It just wasn't a thing. To be honest, I still don't know anyone personally who has an air conditioner in their house. If you live in an apartment, perhaps, and perhaps in offices, you will see it more and more. But in your private home, I don't know anybody. So the question about people's attitudes towards them having them in their homes, friends and family, nobody knows anyone with air conditioners. Maybe it has changed in the past few years, but even when I was living in the UK and we had a heat wave back in 2003, which I remember getting up to 37 degrees, our cars didn't have air conditioners, right? Most cars for people in their 20s would not have air conditioners, but we just got by. Yeah, it was certainly uncomfortable and horrible and sweaty and sticky, but there was no alternative, right? You just roll down the windows and get on with it. And then homes during that heatwave summer, sure, they were much hotter than usual and everyone had a fan, but you just open the windows at either end, most people living in homes with gardens. So now people would understand more. I think in the past, it would have the connotation of, what are you doing? Why would you install air conditioning? There's no need for this, right?
That's very, very shocking to me. They don't have ACs in cars even. And when you are thinking about installing an AC, and people would be asking, why are you doing that? So I think people's attitudes, perceptions are doing a big part when it comes to how do you cool yourself down in a very hot day.
I mean, and Peter, and thank you, Peter, for taking part in the show today. We experienced this in Canada too. I grew up without an air conditioner.
Yeah, actually, me too.
And you just, because you're from Inner Mongolia, right? And the reason is because you just don't need it. It's like Pete said, it doesn't even cross your mind because It's just not necessary. Sure, it gets hot in the summertime, but you just open up your windows, it cools down at night, and it's a non-issue. This is not a non-issue anymore. Again, scientists have talked about it. It's climate change, and Europe is dealing with temperatures that are almost unheard of. And the problem is largely the buildings. The buildings are not equipped with air conditioners, and it's not just a simple fix.
And also when I think about their old ways, like Peter said, just get by, go to your garden, open up your window, is no longer working anymore. I guess it also has something to do with how they design and build their homes in European countries, isn't it?
Yeah, because many of the European style of homes and buildings, they were built with thick stones and brick walls that are excellent at trapping warmth when temperatures are below or kind of freezing out there. But they weren't designed for summers like this, like how it is now. So that creates an uncomfortable cycle for people living in European countries nowadays, that even after the sun goes down, many apartments still remain hot because the heat just simply cannot get out. And I feel like personally, I started to realize that even about 7-8 years ago when I was pursuing my degrees in the UK, in London, that people just get by. They don't think about AC. And even when you enter some of those stone houses, like a church or like a lobby of an old school building, for example, you feel cooling. Knowing that there is no AC inside, you still feel cooling. That's the logic that local people have been living by for years.
Those buildings were designed that way.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be that way because European winters can be very cold, right? So keeping heat in the wintertime is what those thick stones are for. It's what those brick walls are for. But fast forward to today, those brick and stone buildings, they absorb the heat in the daytime, and then they kind of release it into your apartment at night. So Peter said a long time ago, we just open up the windows and it's no big deal. Now you open up the windows and it doesn't help at all because your building is holding on to the heat that it absorbed during the day.
You're basically living inside an oven.
Yes.
On some level.
Yeah, it's on some level. It's like a wood brick pizza oven, kind of like that.
And then that brings to really the central debate surrounding this heat wave in Europe is then why just start installing air conditioners? On a mass scale.
Yeah.
Still, it comes down to the housing design because older apartments blocks often lack the space for modern ductwork and electrical systems that may need expensive upgrades, and also the drilling through centuries-old stone walls isn't always straightforward as well. And I think traditionally people, at least in the case of in London, people think of AC as something that's only needed for luxurious uses, like for equipment, for example. I remember back in school, the only classroom that had AC is our computer lab. That's because
they need that.
Yeah, we have very expensive computer for translation softwares and also computers designed for designated uses. So those equipments needed AC. It's not that the people working inside needed it. So that's the logic. And also, even when the installation is allowed, is possible, there simply aren't enough qualified technicians to keep up with the demand.
Yeah, there's not enough people doing the job, which makes sense because nobody needed an air conditioner before.
In the past, yes.
So if you had a job of an air conditioner installation person, that probably wasn't a very wise career choice. There would be no demand for it. Part of it is that. Part of it is that the buildings weren't designed for it. Part of it is, too, what European beautiful old historic buildings look like, right? They're absolutely stunning. So oftentimes you will be prohibited altogether, or if not, at least heavily restricted in terms of being able to put an air conditioner inside that building because of the structure itself.
So you need to go through a lot of paperwork. Even though you're thinking about, I'm going to place an order for an AC now, and it will be shipped to me, for example, 1 week later. But the process of getting it approved could take a bit longer than that. And also, I think payment is another factor.
Very
too.
expensive. Yeah, it can be up to about 1,500 euros to install permanently an air conditioner in your home. So, and even if you want to do that, because it's all a spider web of problems, meaning they're all connected, right? Let's say you do want to shell out the 1,500 euros to install an air conditioner in your house, and you do qualify to have one because it's not prohibited within the building that you live, then you might have to wait for a long time to get it because of the problem we talked about. There's not enough technicians to install them, so you might be on a waiting list. Now, that might not seem like such a big deal. Oh, okay, I can get it in 1 month. I can get it in 2 months. Well, remember, it's 40 degrees outside every single day. You're living inside a brick pizza oven, and therefore, this is a problem that needs solving immediately, not months later.
You can't wait 1 month long to install your AC. And they have actually thinking about different options on the market. I think for a lot of Chinese manufacturers, they are developing like portable new AC machines that don't really require a lot of drilling, a lot of approval. You don't need to go through the paperwork to get it installed and drilled on your wall, but somehow you are able to get it in your home the moment you place your order. Well, at least not. You don't need to wait for 1 month long, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's the condition, the weather condition, and that condition has driven the need. So the strong demand for portable split air conditioners, they already developed by Chinese manufacturers, is indeed possible, and also portable and easy to make true, like you said, Fei Fei, in these countries, because nowadays sales for portable cooling units have surged, and Chinese manufacturers reported a 70% year-on-year increase in portable air conditioning exports. And one brand, Midea, one popular domestic brand here in China, said that our AC sales have grown strongly in parts of Western Europe this year, and markets with relatively low air conditioning penetration, including France, Spain, Germany, and the UK, they have all recorded year-on-year sales growth of around that percentage, over 70%. So, and that's kind of echoed by Gree as well. That's another major brand here in China, who said that the company's AC sales revenue in France, Italy, and Spain rose more than 40% year-on-year in just the first half of this year.
Yeah, Chinese air conditioners to the rescue.
But that sounds like a very simple solution. You're really hot and you need air conditioners, but you can't get it very fast. And then you can buy these Chinese-produced portable ones. But why they're still having big arguments about for or against installing air conditioners?
Well, I touched on it just a few minutes ago, but part of the reason is because of the classic beauty of many of these buildings. Part of it is about the environmental concerns. Attitudes are beginning to change. These heat waves, they're getting longer. They're becoming more intense. The residents who once thought, we don't want these anymore, are starting to think maybe we do now, because we know that air conditioners are bad for the environment, right? And that's taken, in some parts of Europe, that's taken very seriously. I want to talk about the buildings first, though, before I come back to the environmental concerns. There's a town in Italy. It's called Portofino, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And local regulations, they limit visible exterior air conditioning units. And they do this to protect the town's historic character. So, when you put an air conditioning unit, that thing that hangs outside the house, right? They don't want that there because it would destroy the character of the town, they feel. So that's the point I was trying to make when you talk about the beauty of the buildings. So that's one point. And then the environmental concerns, I said some places take it very seriously. In Geneva, Switzerland, I did not know about this. If you want to get an air conditioner in Geneva, a residential air conditioner, you need to prove that you actually need it. So that might mean a medically certified health certificate is necessary to show before you can receive approval for your air conditioner. And the goal, why does Geneva do that? Well, the goal is to limit, number one, unnecessary electricity use, bad for the environment. They want to reduce carbon emissions, bad for the environment. But then, of course, the critics will argue that regulations written for the year 2000 or the year 1993 don't apply anymore.
But if we zoom it out to a societal point of view, that's also the fact that how cooling units require a lot of electricity. That's also jeopardizing people's decisions in terms of how or whether there should be AC installed all over the city or not. Because imagine millions of households being running those ACs simultaneously. Then that's a pressure test on the power grid itself that's covering the entire nation. And also, when you think about EU, the EU is kind of advanced in terms of installing renewables and utilizing green energies. So at this point of view, solar energy is actually a bright spot on just that, because when there's heat waves, it means more sunny days. But the rest of the renewables that they're harnessing, like wind power, for example, that often drops off at this time of the year because of the very oven effect that we mentioned. Wind is not as often as it turns out to be. And then hydropower is kind of limited as well, especially if the heat wave comes with drought. So put it all together, you get a energy pattern of pressure-tested power grid nationwide, plus strong solar, and that's one pillar, plus weak wind and strained traditional power all together. So that's a hard bone to crack in order for governments and authorities to decide if AC should be popularized in their country or not in the first place.
So even if most of the general public's attitudes towards air conditioning start to change, and then policy regulations are being lifted to allow more air conditioners, maybe the infrastructure, not only about the housing itself, not only about the architecture itself, but also the grid system may not be ready for this kind of installation.
That's the problem, isn't it? It's because Europe has such old buildings. What are you supposed to do? This isn't just that's why I said in the beginning, this isn't just an easy fix. I think it's fair to be frustrated, because it's not like this is unprecedented.
It happened.
It happened before. Pete talked about it, right? Back in 2003, Europe had a devastating heat wave. What did he say? 37 plus degrees, right?
Yes.
And that, at that time, had an enormous adverse social effect and economic impact and environmental effects too. People lost their lives. A lot of people, thousands of people lost their lives. The elderly were extremely affected by this. They had forest fires as a result of that. And then you had the impact on ecosystems and glaciers, and it expanded from there. But I bring that up as so as to say it's happened before. So I think people can feel upset. Why haven't we put a plan in place to deal with this? And they did put a plan in place to deal with this, because in the aftermath of the 2003 heat wave, a lot of cities invested a lot of money, and they put that money into something called passive cooling. So that passive cooling doesn't rely on air conditioning. Architects figured out that if they focused on features like exterior shutters on buildings, or thicker insulation, or green roofs, or shaded tree areas, then natural ventilation could help keep cities cooler. Also, building designs that were being built at that time were encouraged to allow air to circulate naturally. And that solution worked for a very, very long time, for decades, as a matter of fact, a couple of decades. But that solution, the passive cooling solution, it doesn't seem like it's a good enough solution anymore.
Or also the weather is just changing too drastically that beyond anybody's expectations and ability and imagination to deal with it. And thinking about here in China, we're not having a heat wave per se. I think in Beijing in particular, this summer can be very cool. A lot of people are saying, it's not as hot as before in Beijing this summer, actually. But on the other side of the story is that we are having a very, very wet weather in Beijing. We have more rains, and that means more floods, more rainfalls, and possibly maybe stronger typhoons coming to China very soon. And I'm saying that is because nobody anticipated when we were talking about global warming, climate change, that it means that Beijing will become more humid than before. No one would expect Paris will see temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius, and even in some cities 44 degrees Celsius in any European cities. It's beyond anybody's expectations, but somehow we still need to deal with this big changes. It's still affecting our daily life. A lot of people in Europe right now are sort of adapting to these changes in very detailed ways in their daily life. For example, they've closed schools in France or modified their schedules during heat waves because the classrooms are just too hot for students to sit in there, and there are more fun stuff happening on the sidelines of the cities in Paris as well.
Yeah, Paris. The authorities, they kept public parks open 24 hours a day. That's kind of a normal one, but what's not normal, they banned drinking alcohol in public from noon each day, and they prohibited takeaway alcohol sales beginning at 6 p.m., and they did that to reduce heat-related medical emergencies. So bars and cafes and restaurants, they remained exempt. But yeah, they put those rules in place. A lot of people weren't happy about that, by the way. Summertime party time, right? Yeah. But yeah, they're doing what they can to. Public health officials are doing what they can to make sure everybody stays as safe as they can.
Yeah, when it comes to this kind of changes, we're no longer talking about broader changes on a planetary scale. We're talking about detailed changes, smaller changes, and smaller lessons maybe we need to learn from our day-to-day life. And so it's true in Europe, so it's true in China, and elsewhere in the world, in North America, in Southern Asia, they're also facing this issue. We'll keep an eye on that for the future episodes of Roundtable. And that is the end of today's Roundtable. I'm Fei Fei, and thanks Steve and Yushan. Thank you for listening to this edition of Roundtable, and I'll see you next time.